Good afternoon, everybody. So a couple of minutes past the time. If anybody else is joining, they'll have to catch up. We've got quite a bit of content to go through, so I'll have to make a start. So good afternoon, everybody, on this Friday. Thank you for joining us. So my name is Steve Beaumont. I am the Product Development Director at PowerON Platforms. So I've got various different outlets where I tend to share some of my knowledge. Twitter's usually the main place these days. However, I do occasionally get a chance to still blog, and that can either be on my personal blog or on the PowerON company blog. Also, for my sins, I've also had the fortune to work on a few of the System Center cookbooks from PAC-T, so ranging across different things from service manager and orchestrator right through to the operations manager side of the world. So enough about me. Let's just very quickly introduce you to PowerON if you're not already worked with us before. So we are a young and vibrant company that's basically been built from the grassroots from a collection of industry veterans, or as we like to say, people that have done it for far too long and love it far too much. So we have both a side of consultancy where we can do the normal type of traditional services, help you with your various needs and desires. But we also have a product business as well, where we have various solutions on the market. Now, I mentioned that I've literally written the book, but we do dedicate our focus around the management technologies for the Microsoft stack. So this goes across both the on-premise and the hybrid world with the System Center products, and across into the cloud world with Azure and some of the technologies like ARM templates and DSC, and the automation of how we streamline your processes. And we're saying that we're very much business-led, not technology-led. So there's lots of shiny toys that come out all the time. One of the things that we're going to be talking today is something that is very new to the market, very new technology, great to play with. But it's more about how we can actually use that to deliver an outcome from your business that makes sense rather than just purely focusing on the technology that is involved. May or may not have mentioned that I'm also a Microsoft MVP, so concentrating in the cloud and data center arena for the last 5 years now. And we're also, as a business, a Microsoft Elite partner in the EMS space. So what are we actually thinking about today? So it's this whole premise around the idea that things are changing. This whole concept of how we deliver services to our customers within the business is changing much more away from that traditional style of, let me go and get a product, let me configure it, maybe I want to go and bolt on a service, and much more these days to how can I consume stuff that actually enables me to focus on what is most important, and that's delivering an outcome to our customers, and actually accelerate how we get there quicker. So some of the challenges that we're facing, especially around the desktop space, is around about how can we actually deal with all these different scenarios where the old school methodology or the thought of lots of devices internally within a corporate building, within the remit of our LAN, doesn't usually sit so well anymore. Yes, you might still have quite a few devices there, but there's also this massive shift to people working from basically anywhere. So how can we support a lot more of this remote working, users that very infrequently come into the main corporate LAN? Yes, we have technologies like VPN and stuff. Some of them can be complex. How do we make sure that not only we're supporting what the users need to get through to do their day-to-day, but also how do we optimize it from an IT perspective to make sure that we still have control? It's all very well and good saying there's a laptop, go off, we might see you never, and then wonder why when that laptop does wander back into the corporate network, it suddenly goes and attacks everything around it because it was unmanaged for so long, didn't have antivirus updates, gets infected, comes in, infects the rest of the environment. And with Windows 10, and as we'll touch on later, what are the new security features and enhancements specifically in Windows 10 makes it a much more compelling reason to look at going and adopting Windows 10 to gain the benefits that enable both the scenarios of having optimized IT delivery, optimized user experience, and enhanced security and defense for ourselves. Now, while we're going through a lot of this we have to consider that there are these two kind of worlds at present. So we have what we're calling legacy IT. In my opinion, I wouldn't call it so much legacy at the minute, it's more that traditional what's going on at the moment. And this shift that's been very heavily driven by the vendors around this modern IT. So taking away from understanding that we just have a single user sat at a single desk with a single desktop PC in front of them, to the idea that the users are flexible, they'll work from home, they might be getting up, reading their emails on a mobile phone while having the cornflakes, then they'll go grab a laptop, they might do a stop if they've got a long journey into the office, McDonald's or something, catch up on some more, maybe go into the CRM system, do some various works. And it could be a mixture as well between whether it's business-owned device and even a personal-owned device. Now, this is always going to be a difficult one to get around on how and what your policy controls are between the complete bring your own device scenario, maybe the choose your own device scenario, or even just ad hoc working on personal devices. A lot of the time, you probably don't even know from within the business that users, unless you have very rigorous controls, if they're dropping on, if they've got Office 365, access it on a browser on the home PC, off their iPad, what devices and how are they actually accessing all this. Now, the biggest thing for me is, apart from the whole apps conversation, and this will be the biggest thing that drives, or not drives so much, but limits on this shift across to it, because not everyone is just having this new fancy lovely cloud world where it's all just SaaS-based apps. There are still these traditional line of business apps, but for me, especially coming from a desktop background, working on the support desk or the desktop teams, is the amount of manual effort that goes in to actually give a user a device. I was talking to one customer a while ago who was saying they took it almost 2 days to be able to actually commission a device and get it out to the end user. That doesn't sound a lot. If you go through a high churn, especially if you do expansions, that can soon add up quite considerably. So how do we get it as automated as possible? And even better, how do we get it to a proactive and self-service stage? And that's what we're going to talk about, where some of the new technologies that are coming in from Microsoft are starting to look around this, and how, especially from PowerON platforms, we're also helping to enable that scenario. So it's about how we can start to look at making that transition from that traditional current legacy IT through to the modern world. So touching on that traditional deployment and the fact that it does take so much time to get through. And that's that idea that the traditional OS deployments, the creating of that image, is the biggest blocker. So taking a reference machine, either a virtual machine, preferably a virtual machine, try not to use a physical to create your reference machine, but then going through the process of deciding what settings need to be enabled, what do we bake into the image, what do we tattoo, what policies do we apply, group policies, what applications do we need, what do we bake into the image again. Hopefully nothing. There's been quite a considerable transition to try and move away from what we used to call fat images to thin images. That was the ideal. But then managing them driver estates, having to decide when a new model is released, has it still got the same network card, has it got changes in this, different firmware versions, keeping up on all that side of things just to deploy a new computer and usually overwriting what was already on it. So we've had an image a new device shipped from like a Dell or HP, take it out of the box, basically ignore what's on it, flatten it, put this fat image back down to it again, and all that takes time and money to achieve. So what we start to look around is, what do we talk around modern deployment scenarios? So the ideal world is going to be to take a PC or laptop, whatever you want to class it as, directly from the supplier, be it drop in at PC World, grab a device, be it order something directly from HP or Lenovo, and customize it rather than deploy it. So take what's on the operating system already, or take what's on the device already in terms of the operating system, and tweak it for your business uses to make it as productive and ready for use as quick as possible. Now, the ideal around this is making it self-service. To do that, we have to make it as seamless as possible for the user. The fewer button clicks that we can get to, the better. Users are coming up in terms of their technological skills. So obviously they are not an IT person. They're never expected to be an IT person. So we have to treat it with as much business language and simplicity as possible. So this is where we start to get this idea of self-service deployment, or employee-driven self-service deployment. And that's the idea of trying to get away from this custom imaging problem. We've already said the time, the money that goes into it, the limiting of the hardware choices because we have to handle the drivers, looking at actually keeping staff employed with the skills and keeping on top of the process to keep up with this is not a simple task at the best of times. If you just go though and say, here you go, there's a new PC, and do nothing to it, you're going to get into some situations where users get presented with an end user license agreement. They start looking at it and going, well, actually, most users are just going to scroll and just click accept without ever reading it. But actually, within the business, is that even allowed? They're accepting it on behalf of the business on a device. Do they know the ramifications? It is a business decision as to whether it should be accepted or not. But again, it's just another screen that's in front of the user that they might not be aware of. And then becomes all these different questions, like, what's it for? It's kind of obvious it's for work use, but maybe it is a bring your own device scenario. So is it a personal use machine? Well, what about the actual settings? Do I turn on location? Am I allowed to express my GPS data? So we have a full range of different questions, and you get the manufacturer OEM questions more and more presented that the users will usually blindly click through. Even if it's not something that blocks them and it generates service desk calls, which it quite often can, especially with some end users that'll go, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know how to click next, I don't know what this choice means. But more importantly, it is that fact that it's still stuff that they're going to blindly click through and not have the appreciation of what IT actually had the intent that it should have been. And one thing that is very key in my mind, especially at the moment, is to just jump into this now would present every user that went through the self-service as an administrator. And that's a big no-no. We don't want end users having admin rights on the devices, which is what the current process does. So Microsoft came up with this idea of Autopilot. How can we actually make this as simple as possible? So I'm not going to do death by PowerPoint for too much longer. I'm going to actually get in and we're going to have a look at this. But the whole concept around the Autopilot service is that we should be able to have our agreements with our hardware vendors, be it HP, there's HP, Lenovo, I'm going to get shot for not mentioning half the other manufacturers at the minute. Toshiba's in there. Dell are now on board with it. And I think there's another couple as well. There's about 5 or 6 in total that are part of this scheme soon. And I will prefix it at this point. The building blocks are coming into place. You can treat Autopilot currently as in preview. There is dependencies on both the Windows operating system, which we now have 1709, which solves a lot of that. Dependencies on the hardware vendors adopting this, and then there are some MDM features as well that we're going to be dependent on. So the idea is that the hardware vendor should ship the devices either out to IT as a stock item or directly to the employee. But at that same time, they're going to give you the device IDs for your order. So you can receive them. Later on down the line, they're looking to have these automatically sync into the service, but initially it will be they will deliver you a file with the device IDs on. The IT admin will then upload them into the service. You will match them to an Autopilot profile. So we have to have that configuration step of deciding how we want the service to actually behave. But what that should mean is when the end user does get their device, when they go through the onboarding process, it will take down, well, it will match up the device ID. It will automatically go, hang on a second, this is enrolled in Autopilot. Go find the profile with the configuration that you as an IT admin have defined, looking at trying to skip things like the questions at the beginning, privacy details, end user license agreement, etc., and configure that device as you see fit as a corporate device. So, enough PowerPoints. Let's go and have a quick look at how some of this is strung together. So one thing I mentioned just a minute ago was this fact that at present, until the device manufacturers are on board and shipping out the devices and supplying you with the device IDs, if you want to try this for yourself, then it's basically a case of taking a machine, you run a PowerShell script to get some of that information out of it, which you can then use as part of a CSV. So with this being all Windows 10 focused, it's really easy because you can go and pull the script down basically from a device that has internet connection. So if you use install script, name, get Windows Autopilot info. So basically you're saying install script. So this is a new command that's present within Windows 10 that will go off to an online repository, so the PowerShell gallery in this case, and go and pull me down the script module for Get Windows Autopilot. So it tells me to accept a couple of things. Do I want to add in the various installation paths? Just skip through this for a couple of times. That should go and grab me the script, which should then allow me to run get-Windows Autopilot. Now I'm going to specify out file. you can put this onto screen. I think I've got one here, auto.csv, and that would dump me all the information that I need across into the CSV file. Now, if I just show you what it does without the actual out file, you can see it's basically bringing me back the hardware hash of my device. Now, CSV that I did earlier, you can see that it basically creates one with the serial number, so up to that comma, the Windows product ID, and then that hardware hash on top of it. So this is where we need to take this information. So this could be one that's either supplied by the device manufacturer, or it could be one that we've generated like this, or in the future, just synchronized directly up. And we take that into the Autopilot service, which I'll show you in a minute. So for now, if you want to test, it's a case of running that install script, get Windows Autopilot info, output the details into a CSV file from the actual device, which allows you to onboard it. You will then need to reset that device because at this point you're already on the system. Quick tip, if you do want to be able to get into this without having to completely set up a device and reset up a device, you can go into what we call audit mode during the out-of-box experience, grab this information, and then basically tell it to shut the machine down so you can go back through the process without having to worry about completely sys-prepping it. Now, all of this lot starts within your Azure Active Directory. So there is a couple of requirements for this. One being you need to have Azure Active Directory, you need to have Windows Store for Business, and preferably you need to have Windows Intune to make the most out of this. Other MDM providers will be enabled to use with this, but Intune's just the easiest one for me to demo at the moment. Now, within the Azure Active Directory, we have a couple of things that we want to look at. So if I go through into my users and groups, we will notice there is one specific thing under device settings. So under device settings, and this is where I have that great appreciation, greater appreciation over making sure that this is still under IT's control. We don't want to have this completely Wild West scenario where anyone can just go and onboard a device, go grab something random, and it gets configured. So we have a couple of choices. Now, within my environment, because I tend to test a lot of bits and pieces, I just say all users can enroll devices into Azure Active Directory. More than likely, you're going to want to change this into a selected side and either do it based on group of users. It might be you say, well, actually, anyone that has a license for Intune can enroll a device. Or you might put some automation further around the side where a request for a new device comes in and you automatically populate a group that you specified to say, fine, we know that user's getting a new device. They're now allowed to enroll devices. Later on, we can automatically remove them from it, just to give you that control over the fact that not everyone's going to be onboarding devices all of the time. Second one, we can actually enforce multi-factor authentication during the onboarding process. So again, if somebody's credentials got leaked, it doesn't mean that hackers then going to go and grab a random VM, onboard it and gain access to your network, because hopefully the MFA prompts are going to then block that attempt. So highly, highly recommended to have MFA on for any scenarios where you're doing this. The other one is probably not a good idea to have unlimited number of devices. Average number of devices for users these days tend to vary between 5 and 7. So 5 should be enough. You can obviously then go on onboard devices if they are just churning through devices that often, but don't just allow them a completely unlimited amount. Then finally, this is also something to highlight. So additional local admins on the devices. So as I mentioned earlier, this part you can set up now with Azure Active Directory without any involvement with the Autopilot service, and it will allow somebody to manually go through that out-of-box experience and onboard a device for management, but they will be a local admin. Here, you can specify additional people out of your Active Directory, help desk analysts, so on, to also be local administrators, so you can do remote work and control with it. So that's that piece. So that bit has to be at least enabled so that you can have somebody enroll a device in Azure AD, put some security controls around it. The second one is you're going to think around what you do from an MDM perspective to auto-enroll devices into management. So again, probably don't want all. Scope it down to either the same sort of people or people that are specifically licensed for your MDM solution, so these devices can be automatically brought into management when they're onboarded. So we've got the first bit. We've now got some devices, got the security controls and the policies in place to allow devices to go on board. Because I'm using Intune, I'm going to go into here. We've got this device enrollment piece. Now we're talking about Windows enrollment, so I'll drop to this piece. And we have this new Windows Autopilot that showed up within the Intune console. Now, things move very quick in this. One of my next slides is around the roadmap for this, and it was talking about the status screen. Now, this wasn't here this morning. It's now in here already. So we are actually getting some extra features coming in all of the time. I don't think this will work for my demo today because I literally configured this about 5 minutes before the start of the session, and I've not got the buttons to assign it to anything. But this is a new part that will actually give us more of a progress of what's going on during the onboardment. The other flip side is we have these deployment profiles. So I have one. You can have multiples, you can assign them to different groups. This is where we start to decide on what we control during the onboarding process. Now, as I mentioned, this can be treated as, well, it says preview at the top anyway. There is only a very, very limited subset of what we can and can't do at the minute. And that is basically these three settings. Do we want to show the users the privacy settings, that whole location awareness, allow Cortana? Do we want to show them the end user license agreement? And do we want the users to be an administrator or standard on the devices? Now, this was the killer bit for me. If nothing else, I just want to enforce this bit for now, standard. Now, these policies weren't originally within the Intune console, and there is a bit of a dual personality going on here, mainly because this will work with other MDM vendors. So I have a bit in here which is my devices that are onboarded for MDM, and there is nothing. However, if I go and click sync, fingers crossed, and we might see this in a little while, it should pull all the information out of the Windows Store for Business. And this is where the bulk of the actual control and stuff will go on, because this can then allow you to link into other MDM vendors, etc. So when you log into the Windows Store for Business, you get to it businessstore.microsoft.com, go to the Devices tab, and we have this. And we can see I have two machines that I currently have onboarded. I also have my profiles in here, even though my login's timed out, so bear with me while it comes up. There we go. So this is very similar to what you just saw a minute ago within Intune. So it's syncing the information that I created in here across into my Intune service. It's going to be an interesting one about where we actually do the updates and maintenance of it. I'd probably for now stick to doing it within the Windows Store for Business, but it's the same set of settings that we have anyway. So disable local admin, that's in there. Skip the privacy settings, skip the end user license agreement, and Autopilot is making me enroll automatically for work or school accounts. More importantly, I'm also getting this signing experience with my company branding, as we'll see in a sec. So we have them a couple of different things. Let's give this a refresh in case it does. There we go. So it's pulled them devices that I have across from the Windows Store for Business and into my Intune subscription. So if we're really lucky tonight, so I know what the demo gods are like, I have a nice fresh 1709 VM that is just sat on the very first screen of the out-of-box experience. So if I go and say yes, so all the end users should be doing is choosing what language you want to use. Unfortunately, I'm not bilingual, so I'm not going to choose any other language. Don't want another keyboard. Now, it will connect to the network at this point. Now, with me having a VM, it's already connected to the network. If you was offline, it would prompt and say, well, actually, there's some available Wi-Fi connections, for example, and it will also handle the captive network portal scenarios. So if you're sat in McDonald's, you can still get on. I seem to have a fascination with McDonald's today. So it's gone through, it's looked for some updates, it's done a quick reboot. This could be because I left it for so long. Now I'm hoping the demo gods account to me because I did clone this VM just before the session. So it could think it's still the other old machine, which will be pretty disastrous. But if we look at this point, it should detect that it's enrolled in Autopilot. It looks like it's doing it. It should bring up my company branding. So it should say welcome to PowerON. There we go. So this is a fresh machine, fresh VM, could be a fresh physical device, absolutely no image customization done at this point, but it's recognizing that this device has been registered with my company. So therefore I should be using a company account to log on. So if I use my works email, normal AD creds. Now, while I didn't have a global setting for multi-factor authentication, I absolutely do have it set on my account for multi-factor authentication. So I should get a notification through on my phone any second to say approve this. There we go. That's approved via the app on my phone. It's not using text message. That's approved me to allow me in. And now my device will pull down any policies that have been applied, any applications, and configure it ready for work use. This will do the initial very first quick, get things ready. It should then ask me for a PIN number. Here we go. So Windows hello, because I have this enabled for our organization. So this is just for not forcing me, but well, it is because I've enabled it and forced. But this is basically saying that set a PIN to make logon easier and also register with some of the biometrics, etc. And we're done. So that initial splash screen with the progress didn't pop up, which is what I was kind of hoping it would, but I knew it wouldn't because I've not actually assigned it to anything in particular. Otherwise, we would start to get that progress screen now. They'll say, hang on a second, you're applying this policy, I'm doing this, installing applications, and just give the users that bit more of a visual feedback as to what exactly is going on. So, oh, no, it does do it. Wonderful. So we can see my custom message. So welcome to PowerON, hang tight, settle back, have a couple hours to sort things out, and we can see it's just pulling down the policy controls now from the Intune service to apply to this device. Now this is great because your user can continue, but at least they get a bit of a visibility of exactly where it's going. Now the only thing it's showing at the minute is security policies, not apps. Like I say, these type of things are features that are coming on all the time. So that's going to apply in the background at some point, so I'm just going to say, okay, carry on. Now this is an interesting bit. So this is PowerON's custom Pulse DMS client that I have as part of the Intune subscription, set to deploy to all new machines that we've onboarded manually, enrolled, or done through the Autopilot service. And we'll come back to this, but this is going to do some extra nice things to the actual device. And this is, again, completely hands-free. User could have onboarded self-service, they should be cracking through, and now things are starting to happen with some nice feedback. We'll come back and touch on that. So I keep on mentioning that A is in preview and B, the stuff on the roadmap. So one of the first things that I was going to talk about when I made this slide deck was around the progress display. You've already seen an example today of at least the security portion of that. Now that literally came in this morning. I'm glad that I managed to get into my demo in time for it. So more and more stuff will come along. Got things like bypassing the end user agreement. There will be expanded MDM features that go through this one. What can we apply? But that'll bring in different scenarios around things like, well, actually, how do we support Active Directory joined devices? So we saw that what I just did a minute ago has onboarded the device into an Azure Active Directory. But what happens if we do want still that traditional AD joined experience? So these are the type of things that Microsoft are working on to look at enabling different scenarios. Maybe actually when we order a bulk load of devices from the actual suppliers, we want to be able to sit down and go, well, actually, I know that Fred's going to have this one, Joe's going to have that one, Mavis is going to have that one. So how can we actually define in advance and tie devices to users? Now, you saw there's a very, very limited set of Autopilot profile settings at the minute, nowhere near enough in terms of what we need to get for configuration. So that will expand over time. Multi-factor authentication for device setups already in there, so this is actually pretty rapidly out of date already. And completely automated device setup would be the complete goal. So this is where we don't even press a single button. We get it so tied down so that we say that, right, this device is going to be for a kiosk machine. This device is going to be for a frontline customer service desk or something. So that all we have to do is literally turn it on and it's configured. The user does nothing. Because what I haven't got within these slide decks is a couple of really cool new features that are in 1709. One of them is the whole idea of being able to do an automated reset. Well, I say automated reset, a better, more granular level of reset your PC option that you have, where we don't remove it from Azure Active Directory, we don't remove it from management, we keep some of the policies and profiles on there, so when we hit the reset button, it will basically take them straight back to the login page. Not straight back, you're going to have to wait while it clears out applications, profiles, so on. But we don't need to remove half the stuff. We're not resetting it for anybody to use or repurpose as a consumer device. We want to reset it back to a level that we had already defined as a corporate machine without having to wait for it to go back through all the applying settings, etc. So that's a new feature that is within 1709 now and can be enabled through policy control. So where should I go with any of this lot? Well, I keep on mentioning this whole idea of the traditional IT and the cloud IT. So we have that whole Active Directory versus Azure Active Directory. We're going to domain join it, we're going to Azure AD join it. Group policy versus MDM policies. Again, this whole big divide around the minute of you can do pretty much massive amounts of group policy. You can do a subset at the minute with MDM policies. What happens if you've got config manager? Are you going to go and just go straight to Intune? What does Intune offer? Is it comparative? So there's lots of different decisions. Now that bottom one is one to really call out as well. On-premise activation, are you using Mac keys or a KMS server versus in the new Autopilot scenarios or the Azure AD onboarding side is being able to have it activate against a subscription that's held in the cloud and automatically step up from Pro to Enterprise Edition just purely at logon without even a reboot. And this brings in this idea of this cloud IT, but more importantly, how we start to bridge across the two areas, traditional, modern. So that whole idea of the modern management, this is where we start looking at things like, well, we've got all this stuff in the cloud, we want to get across into the cloud, we need, or we've been driven across into the cloud. But we have all this stuff on premise at the minute. We have that legacy, we've got skills within config manager, we know how it's done, we're doing it X, Y, and Z way. So if Microsoft has their way, they'd love you just to jump ship. Just go and move everything now. Just stop what you're doing, just set up fresh across in the cloud. That's not going to happen. Not going to happen overnight. You might get small pockets of people that are absolutely, they don't do much across there. They can just jump across. So it is more a case of how do we start to bridge this gap? How do we start to look at transferring certain areas, maybe to pick certain policies where the group policies don't actually have it, or it's more awkward, it's easier to do it across there. Actually, apps are going to be better to be done over here. So you start to pick and choose where the best scenario is. Perfect example is apps. Intune considers it as either a modern cloud app from the store or as an MSI installation. So if you've got an executable, you're out of luck. Simple as that. Not unless you start to do weird and wonderful fancy things with scripts downloading from public blob storage and so on. You're not going to take your normal setup.exe and get it installed via Intune. So what about if we could actually say you can have your cake and eat it? And this is where we have this concept of Pulse DMS, where we start to bridge this gap nicely, using some of the technologies we're absolutely familiar with from the traditional IT management world, bridging across into that new modern management world and enabling these different scenarios. So we look at it like this. We have Pulse DMS in the cloud, hosted, sat there, highly available, managed and maintained for you, so you consume it as a service. allowing you to still decide which policies and controls you want to apply to a device at the onboarding time, how you're going to control what apps they get, what you're going to do in terms of, oops, my slide decks are not playing ball. So how are we going to control what policies they get, how are we going to decide on different areas of control that we want to apply, how we customize that actual OS fit for business. Do we need to look at uninstalling things from the manufacturers? Maybe it is the whole Lenovo Superfish scenario. We need to get rid of certificates as quickly as possible. Or we need to decide that we actually don't want McAfee antivirus trial on the device. So we can set up more customized uninstalls to customize that device through the task sequence methodology. But even better is we're not just purely a Windows 10 world at the moment. We still have this legacy debt of technology around Windows 7, Windows 8 or 8.1. Not even going to go down the route of Vista and so on, that we're going to need to still manage in the same fashion. So how do we control what we can actually bring on board no matter where it is? So this is the other key thing. We need to be able to manage these devices wherever they are, without reliance on VPN connections and so on. So how do we actually start to look at doing that? And that's via Pulse. This allows us to actually control all of these lovely things with much more granular methodology than what we had previously. So click there. So we looked at key things around this. It needs to be simple. Need to make sure that people can still get on, access this console as simplistically as possible, do their daily tasks to be able to manage the devices, be able to see information around them devices, then be able to make sure they can empower that whole flexible working, the self-service, allow users to pull down applications, get the software they need, as well as control and secure and patch and manage the ongoing life cycle of these devices. So I'll have a couple of looks what that looks like. So that's busy still going in the background, so we'll leave that to it. I didn't actually bring up my console in advance, so let me go into it now. That's going to log me in as admin. So it's our internal dev environment. So it shouldn't be logging me on. Well, it should, but I don't want it to. So this is the simplified interface that we have directly into the Pulse DMS service. Now I'm logged on as a limited test administrator just for a small subsection company, so I can only see the devices that are within my control. Now we can see a couple of these devices that we've just been busy onboarding and testing. So this is one that I did this morning, so that was way too early. So that other one will come through very shortly, but I can get various information out of here now where I might want to see what inventory is on that device. So I can easily get in, control it. Again, this is web interface, so it doesn't really matter where I'm sat at the minute. I can go in and check various things around what hardware this is. So Chris obviously has a lovely Surface Pro, what software's on the machine, and start to do my daily activities in terms of supporting it. Maybe it is a case of I actually want to go through and deploy some software to that device, or maybe I want to launch some actual tools to do some remote control activities. So I have control over who is actually over that day-to-day maintenance tasks, who's got the devices, whether they're there, what software's on them. And then I can start to break it down and say, well, actually, I need to be able to deploy software. So this is where we can handle that whole executables as well as MSIs and other various things like app-v packages. So if I want to create a new software, so this should give me that flexibility. When my underpowered dev environment wakes up, Here we go. I'm going to skip actually uploading anything just to show you some stuff. So it could be as simple as a script installer. That's actually a bad name, but you can take anything basically at that point. The standard config manager terminologies. I can go and upload setup.exes if it is an MSI file, or maybe we just want to deploy out a web URL, for example. Set some various bits around it. What do we want for installation commands? How we detect it? Does it replace any items? So this is a good one when we're doing that lifecycle management. Maybe we're swapping from something like paint.net across to MS Paint. How do we deploy it and replace existing applications? Maybe we're just doing version upgrades that don't seamlessly upgrade, so you have to uninstall first, so we can mark stuff to go and uninstall previously. Is there anything that it depends on? So whereas Intune is very much a case of here's a file, go and send it down to the device, we have this control and flexibility now over not only what we're delivering, but how it behaves. Where is it targeted to? Is it only allowed to run on Windows 10 or Windows 7, for example? Must it have the VC++ runtimes installed in advance beforehand? So we're getting that lovely control around it. Now, while I'm running short on time at the moment, we also have the flexibility around utilizing task sequences to do much more granular work on these devices, whether it be as simple as saying, well, actually, I want this series of applications deployed in this order, maybe with some scripts and stuff to run in between, and that all has to happen as a package, right through to complete OS upgrades or bare metal deployment. So talking about that whole legacy debt of technology that you have that you want to get across and into Windows 10. Now you could absolutely do an in-place upgrade, send the files down, but if it's a 32-bit machine, you're going to miss out on some of the advanced security features we're going to talk about in a minute. You can't use UEFI on a 32-bit machine, so you've got to get it up to 64-bit, enable UEFI BIOSes, GPT disks, and so on. So actually using Pulse DMS, we can basically go back to that traditional image-based scenario where we can deliver down a full set of WIM files and all the technology and methodology to go around it to bring a machine completely from Windows 7 in a refresh scenario and up to Windows 10, as well as enabling refresh scenarios, doing the lifecycle management, servicing rings, endpoint protection control, so granularly defining, compliance and policy settings, so looking at where we're doing replacements of group policies, and the whole raft of different settings around it. So whirlwind tour there. There will be upcoming webinars where we focus purely on DMS for more information. So talk around some of the security features. Now, when I first started to build out this slide deck, I had something like 17 different slides on this, which was just way too overkill for this short webinar. I could spend a day talking about security alone. A couple of things I wanted to call out though. Now, previously to I think 1709, might be even 1703, a lot of these had their own individual names or variations of it. They are all basically now part of a set of capabilities of the Windows Defender brand. So we have Windows Defender Credential Guard, Windows Defender Application Guard, Windows Defender Exploit Guard, and so on and so forth. So a couple of things around this. So we have Credential Guard. This is about using some of the virtualization-based technology within Windows 10 and your hardware to isolate your credentials securely to make sure things like Mimikatz and stuff cannot go and pull them out of memory and reuse them for hash the hash, golden ticket attacks, and so on. We have Windows Defender Application Guard. So that is more focused around actually isolating threats using your hardware-based containers for things like currently Microsoft Edge, where we basically completely virtualize and isolate that into a sandbox using virtualization to again stop it breaking out, doing memory buffer overflows, so it makes it one of the most secure browsers possible. And that'll expand over apps in time. But that also links in with Windows Defender Application Control. Now this is great because we can basically start to lock down Windows almost like a mobile OS or iOS or something, where only trusted apps can be run. And this is above and beyond just simply things like App Locker, because what you can do is actually set it to automatic allow list management, which then hooks into Microsoft's Intelligent Security Graph, and it will pull down from Microsoft basically known and verified widely used applications. So this whole trust awareness from the security research Microsoft do, without you having to sit there and maintain it. So things like the Adobe Acrobat will be on there immediately. I'm probably picking bad examples of some stuff that gets regularly not hacked but have vulnerabilities that need addressing. But basically, you're not going to have a malware that's on that list that's going to be allowed to run on your PC. So that will be good for some scenarios, especially kiosks, etc. Others, you might want to have a bit more control over it, especially if you have in-house developed applications. A couple of other things, we have Windows Information Protection. So this is that idea of being able to actually mark and classify where data, when it resides on your devices, whether it's classed as corporate data, or whether it's been allowed to copy off into things like personal Dropbox, onto USB keys, or whether it gets encrypted and flagged at that point. Now, Exploit Guard is a brand new thing that's come through. I am going to talk about that in a little bit more detail in a little while, but it's a replacement for what was Emmet. System Guard is a new name for a collection of technologies we had before, things like UEFI Secure Boot, Trusted Boot, device health attestations, all the things that made sure that your device at that very first point in time of powering on is actually healthy and can be trusted to actually start, and it hasn't been rooted in effect. Device Guard, an interesting one. So this has actually changed with the Fall Creators release of 1709. So this is no longer considered a direct feature, but it's not, now it's actually considered just an advanced security mode. So when you now start to look at Device Guard, it's actually a combination of using it with things like Application Guard and Exploit Guard that have to be enabled, and you have to have Windows Defender running to be able to actually start to use some of these services. So this actually starts to bring in the configurable code integrity, so building on what application control would do with that automatic allow whitelist, and now starting to allow you to define, and puts DMS links nicely into this to actually set your baselines and actually say, well, only anything that is pushed from Pulse DMS, so that becomes your one true source of control for allowed applications. If it's not in there and it's not pushed via Pulse DMS, then it cannot be run on the system in effect. And then we do have this other really, really cool thing that I have definitely not got time to talk about today, and that's advanced threat protection. So while a lot of that stuff I just talked about was about securing your device now, trying to stop people getting through the door, inevitably, if somebody tries hard enough, they will get in through the door, and then we need to have something that actually monitors for that, spots it as quick as possible, and actually traces what they've done. So that forensic analysis, and when it does catch on to that, can automatically put things into action to block any more damage being done. So start to restrict user accounts, start to lock down machines, disconnect, put firewall rules in place, and so on. So ATP is something that's really cool and worth looking at. Now, two things that I said that I really wanted to dive into a little bit more. So Windows Defender antivirus. Sounds daft, it's an AV, it's been around for ages. A couple of things I wanted to call out on this, and this is the fact that it's dispelling the FUD that was being put around it, that Windows Defender for antivirus solution was not good enough. It's actually really, really good these days. It's not to say it wasn't. Well, actual fact, okay, debatable. But the fact is now, and especially since about February of this year, it's been absolutely rocking in terms of security aspect. So it's won several different awards. It's won all the best antivirus software for client collections. Not going to go into them too much. You can look them up yourselves at AV Test. It was more the fact of the actual detection rates. It consistently, absolutely consistently in real world tests, caught stuff. More importantly, it was outperforming other vendors most of the time. Now, my brother, he is an absolute madman. Follow him on Twitter if you want some very, very strange ramblings, but he's very, very clever in the security space. Now, recently there was a thing called Crunchyroll, a website called Crunchyroll that got hacked, or kind of spoofed. It was a good one, but basically they injected a Trojan into crunchyview.exe. Now, my brother picked up on this. He was doing some submissions. From the moment that the security community started to submit samples, Microsoft Defender started to detect it within 16 minutes. The next closest one to that was Sophos, which was still a fair bit behind. So Microsoft absolutely on the ball at the moment in terms of doing the whole cloud. This would require the advanced Cloud Maps membership. There's no extra cost, it's just you submit more telemetry to it, but it's well worth doing for having that extra security posture within your environment. So just wanted to bring this up. Any sort of considerations or thoughts in the past that you may have had around Windows Defender, or when it was endpoint protection or Microsoft Security Essentials, them days are gone. Microsoft are probably the biggest security vendor that you never hear of in the world, and all their research and stuff that are going into it is now starting to show back into the consumer world, back into Windows 10, and especially Windows Defender AV. So the other thing that I wanted to touch on was this exploit guard. So this is, well, there was a product called EMIT, so the Enhanced Mitigation Experience Toolkit, that was a separate download. Not a lot of people, well, people that knew how to configure it and manage it used it, but it was something that you had to actively go and control, install, configure. This is now basically, they've deprecated EMIT. This is now, I didn't have all my notifications turned off. This is now something that's been deprecated as EMIT as a standalone tool, but is now built in to Windows 10 1709. So you can actually very easily just set some policies and controls up to enable certain features. Now, under the majority of circumstances, you can put it in at its basic level and it will just start to work without much interference whatsoever. I will clarify that you need to test this. Don't just go and enable it globally within your environment. Obviously, you've probably not got much 1709 dispersals at the moment, but start testing this. The more that you can start to crank up the security controls, yes, the more risk you have of it blocking bits and pieces, but even certain little things around DDE, execution protection and so on is absolutely vital. Will knock off half the attack vectors you have around things like Office macros, embedded DDE attacks within emails. Look at this. There is no extra cost in using it. It is part of Windows. So almost exactly on the hour. So apologies for overrunning slightly. So I just want to ask, is there any questions at this point? Is there any that have or haven't been answered? Just check my question panes. If you already have config manager current branch, can you do all of the same things here in that? Kind of. So while the Pulse DMS solution heavily relies on some of the technology and stuff behind configuration manager current branch, there are a lot of the newer technologies in terms of things like cloud management gateways and stuff that you have to be aware of. You have to deploy into Azure. You have to have the management and the understanding of the capabilities to control them. And then there is a lot of extra secret sauce bits and pieces that we do within the Pulse DMS service to make the whole process streamlined, automated in how we handle devices in the onboarding side. So kind of, it's more a case of config manager is good if you just want to start managing control and getting a bit more of the internet coverage, not so much for the completely end-to-end, because there's interaction and moving parts with different scenarios, if that makes sense. So Pulse DMS is a PowerON developed service. Yes, like I say, there's going to be a much wider set of webinars and stuff around Pulse DMS. It's just I wanted to introduce it at this point because it is nice how we just get that tie-in with the new technologies, the direction of travel that Microsoft are going with the whole Windows Autopilot, the modern configuration and control, and we tie nicely into that to give not just the limited subset that is available now, but that full, rich, enterprise complete features without having to worry about the installation, maintenance, configuration, understanding, and the structuring and the control of how to do that. So we sit nicely alongside, either independently, you don't have to take Intune, don't have to take Azure Active Directory, at least at the basic level, but you don't have to worry about all that different configuration sets to use Pulse DMS. It can be completely separate and standalone, but we tie nicely into this whole new scenario of enabling this end-to-end user-driven scenario and still having the complete nth degree flexibility and security that you're used to at the moment. Give it a second or two for any more questions. If you've got one, don't hold back, get it in the chat channel as quick as possible. If anyone would like to come off mute, just put on mute or something in the question channel and I can take you off and you can ask verbally. If not, you know my name. So Steve Beaumont at PowerON, steve.beaumont@poweronplatforms.com if you want to email me, or reach out to your various account managers if you already have one to engage, or we can contact you later if you answer some questions at the end. So it doesn't look like there's anything just yet. So trying to keep to time, I'm only just slightly over. So nothing left but to say thank you very much for attending. There is a survey at the close of this call, so when you drop out of it, please do make the various people in marketing very happy and fill out the questions. Helps us to both improve on our content and our technical delivery styles. It's rated out 5, so feel free to give me all 6s. I know it only goes up to 5, hey. But please do fill out that form. It can only help us improve better and we can make sure that we get the most valuable content back to yourselves. So thank you very much everyone for attending and enjoy your weekends.